Oh.
But once they hear you, they'll.
It's now 6 o'clock. I'd like to call the July 17th meeting of the City of Cathedral City Planning Commission to order. Madam Secretary, do we have a roll call?
Commissioner Mead?
Present.
Vice Chair Malkoff?
Present.
Commissioner Lee?
Present.
Let the record show our newest commissioner, Commissioner McPhail, was unable to attend today.
So our next item would be Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like everybody to stand for a Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So on the agenda, do we have any additions or changes?
I'll let Deputy Director Molina handle that.
We don't have any changes to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the election of the chair and vice chair, but we recently got news that our esteemed chair, who's in the audience with us now, and we'll miss very much, has relocated, and we'll need to get a fifth person. And our other person is ill today, so we only have three, and we would like to elect the officers with a full contingent. So we'll continue this item to the first meeting in September. By that point, the City Council will have acted and we'll have a full commission. Do we need to make a motion on that?
Yes, Vice Chair, we'll make a motion.
Okay, do we have a motion to continue it to, what day in September is it?
We can just continue to a future date.
Well,
be determined.
Well, we have it's moved by Commissioner Lee and seconded by Commissioner Mead that we move this to the first meeting in September.
I can do that.
Motion passes 3-0. So now we move on to public comments. The public is invited to address the Planning Commission on any matter not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on an agenda item, please wait to be recognized under that item. Except for special circumstances, the Brown Act prohibits the Planning Commission or staff from responding or taking action on any comments made by the public unless it pertains to an item that appears on the agenda. All speakers should give their name and city of residence, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. And we have Sky Daly, our former chair, esteemed chair.
Please state your name and city of residence.
Well, my name is Sky Daly, and my city of residence is now La Quinta. So good afternoon. I address you today not as the chair of the Cathedral City Planning Department, Commission, excuse me, but as a member of the public. My move to La Quinta was sudden and unexpected, and so for that I want to apologize to the Commission and the Planning Department and the City Council for any turmoil that's caused. Obviously, that was not my intention. In fact, my move was so unplanned and unexpected that this is my first opportunity to address the Commission about it. And so, in true Sky fashion, I'm going to take advantage of the full 3 minutes. The first thing I want to say is that I love Cathedral City. I bought my first house in Cathedral City. Cathedral City gave my husband and I the opportunity and ability to afford to buy into the American dream of home ownership. And that's a dream that is grossly out of reach for most of my generation. Which leads me to my second point. We need more houses. We need to build more houses. There's a lot of solutions that are a little gimmicky coming out of Sacramento right now that I think history is going to judge to have been cuter than they were effective. The only solution to too few houses is building more houses. So I would love to encourage this commission and the planning department to do everything within its power to encourage the construction of new homes, both in our community and elsewhere. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox and just say thank you. Thank you to the commission for an incredible 4 years. I absolutely loved it, much more than I thought I would. And I loved it even when you guys drove me absolutely insane. Thank you to the City Council for the opportunity, but most of all, thank you to the incredibly dedicated members of the Planning Department. You guys are amazing, and the work you do is remarkable. You guys are definitely the unsung heroes of this community. So with that, I will hand over the reins to you. Good luck, Godspeed, and I will be watching from the East Valley. Thank you, guys. And I'm taking my nameplate with me.
Thank you for your service. So the next item is approval of the minutes, and I think that we have a question for the attorney, given the situation that we only have 2 commissioners that were here, and even when we get a full contingent, it'll still only be 2 commissioners that were at the meeting and what the process is.
Okay,
City
I
attorney.
know this.
City attorney's on that. The city attorney is on that.
On the minutes, as long as you're a standing member of the commission, you can vote on approving or disapproving the minutes. You don't have to be from the past or having attended that meeting, because otherwise, when new commissions are appointed, you'd never get the old minutes approved. So as long as you have a quorum and you're a recognized standing member of the commission, you can move and approve the minutes if you so choose so, or you can defer that to the next meeting. That's all. So you do have that ability.
Vice Chair Malakoff, can I just add that, just for a point of order, that our planning director and our city attorney are available via Zoom for this meeting?
I was aware of that, but we do have our answer. So on the approval of the June 5th minutes, are there any requests to speak on this item from the public?
Do we have anyone wishing to speak? There's no one looking to speak, Vice Chair. There's no one looking to
Are
speak.
there any corrections or additions to the minutes? And do we have a motion? Yep.
There are no changes. Let the record show a motion was made by Commissioner Lee and seconded by Vice Chair Malakoff to approve the June 5th, 2024 meeting minutes. Motion carries all ayes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to our list of public hearing items. Item 4A, General Plan Amendment 24-001, consideration of a general plan amendment to change approximately 3.43 acres designated as CN, neighborhood commercial, on the general plan land use map to RL, low density residential, in order to revert the land use back to the designation in place prior to the adoption of the 2040 general plan update in 2021. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, there should have been a staff report. Did it show up?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, good evening, Vice Chair Malakoff, Commissioners Mead and Lee. My name is Dom Camps. I'm Associate Planner here at the City, and today I'll be presenting General Plan Amendment 24001 for your consideration. General Plan Amendment 24001 proposes to change the land use designation of an approximately 3.4 acre site along the Ramon Road frontage of APNs 670, 130, 014, and 015. The project site is outlined on the vicinity map shown here in red. As you can see, the subject site only makes up a portion of the 2 underlying parcels. So General Plan Amendment 24001 proposes to change the land use designation on this 3.4 acre area from neighborhood commercial to low-density residential. On this slide, the map on the left shows the land use designations as currently shown on the general plan land use map, and the map on the right shows the proposed designation. Staff is requesting that the Planning Commission consider this general plan amendment and recommend it for approval by the City Council. Some background on the proposed GPA. So the 2040 General Plan Update was adopted by the City Council in July of 2021. An environmental impact report was adopted for the General Plan Update at the same time. The General Plan Update changed the land use designation on the subject 3.4 acre area from low-density residential to neighborhood commercial. The proposed General Plan Amendment would reverse that change, so reverting the General Plan designation for the subject site back to low-density residential as it was prior to the General Plan Update. The 3.4 acre subject site is also part of the approximately 27 acre site for the Mountain View Estates development, which is comprised of tentative tract map 37755 and planned unit development 19001. As shown on the site plan on this slide, the Mountain View Estates project proposes to subdivide the 27 acre site into 110 single-family lots. The tentative tract map and planned unit development were approved by the city's planning commission in September of 2020, which was prior to the general plan update. When these entitlements were approved, the 4 parcels were wholly designated as low-density residential. However, in 2021, the general plan update changed the underlying land use designation for a portion of the site to be neighborhood commercial. So there are 3 main purposes for the proposed general plan amendment. As previously stated, the general plan amendment would revert the land use designations to low-density residential consistent with the designation that was in place prior to the general plan update. Second, the general plan amendment would correct the inconsistency between the general plan land use map and the approved entitlements for Mountain View Estates. And third, the general plan amendment would establish consistency with the housing element. The subject site is included in the general plan housing element as site number 11 in the land inventory for the regional housing needs assessment. This inventory provides a list of parcels that are available to meet the city's RHNA allocations. Site number 11 is identified in the inventory for the provision of up to 120 above moderate income units. So the current designation of the site as neighborhood commercial is inconsistent with the housing element inventory, which plans for the residential development of the site. The proposed GPA would resolve this internal inconsistency between the general plan land use map and the general plan housing element. For clarity, I also wanted to state that the site is currently zoned as R1 single-family residential on the city's zoning map. This zoning is consistent with the low-density residential designation that is proposed by GPA 24001, so no change of zone would be necessary to accompany the proposed GPA. The EIR for the 2040 General Plan Amendment was adopted in July of 2021. On the basis that the proposed change in land use designation on the 3.4 acre site from commercial to residential would result in equal or less significant impacts than those studied in the EIR, staff recommends that pursuant to CEQA guidelines section 15162, no further environmental review is required. The proposed GPA was noticed in accordance with the City Municipal Code. The GPA was also transmitted to local and regional Native American tribes consistent with Senate Bill 18. It was transmitted on May 22nd, 2024, and the tribes have 90 days from this date to respond and request consultation. So far, 2 responses have been received. The Augustine Band of Cahuilla Indians responded. They did not request any consultation, but did request notification if any resources are found on the site during development. The Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians also responded. They requested formal government-to-government consultation, which was conducted on July 16th, 2024, after which the tribe deemed the consultation complete. So based on these findings, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution as provided in Attachment 1 of the staff report, recommending that the City Council take the following actions. 1, find that no further environmental review is required under the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to State CEQA Guidelines Section 15162, subsequent EIRs and negative declarations. And 2, adopt a resolution approving the General Plan Amendment 24001 based on the findings and conclusions contained in the staff report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does the commission have any questions for staff? Commissioner Lee?
Just clarifications, really. So we actually saw the Mountain View proposal again at our last meeting, but our decision then was based on this actually being approved by the City Council. Is that correct?
That's correct. So as a condition of approval on the tentative track map, the City Council must approve this general plan amendment prior to the approval of, this general plan amendment must be approved before the final map can be approved by the City Council.
And then once the GPA is approved by the City Council, our previous decision takes effect. They don't have to take any further action.
The Planning Commission will not need to take any further action. So the GPA is scheduled currently to go to the City Council on August 14th, and the final map is tentatively scheduled to go to the City Council in early September. So first they will have to approve this GPA, and then they can make a decision on the final map.
Okay. And just to revisit the point you made earlier, so this whole area is now classified RL, and the development will be subject to R1 development standards.
That's correct. So currently, there's a section that is designated as neighborhood commercial, but changing that will convert it to RL, and it will be subject to the R1 zoning standards and
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I was just curious, was this just an oversight when the general plan was done? Because they assumed that stretch of Ramon being neighborhood commercial kind of most of the way that it would be, so was it just like an oversight?
We can mostly only speculate. We think that the intent might have been to make a consistent commercial corridor along Ramon Road, but because the entitlements were already approved, there was an error that they should not have changed the land use designation.
Would note that this was identified by staff during the general plan process, but the correction was not made on the map. So this really was an error, and there was no means to correct it but going through a general plan amendment process.
I have one question. We get so many housing tracts that just take so long to go through the process. Has this been submitted for plan check? Have they started the process to submit formal plans to Public Works and to the building department?
I don't believe construction plans have been submitted to building, but the engineering plans have been submitted to the engineering department, and I know they are eager to move forward with approval of the final map.
Well, that's good to hear that they're moving forward at a good rate, so thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for staff? With that, I'd like to open the public hearing, and does the commission have questions for the applicant on this project?
Vice Chair Malakoff, I don't believe that the applicant is present this evening.
Then I don't have any speaker slips, but is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this item?
Looks like we have no one wishing to speak.
Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing. And The clerk has said that there's no other people to have asked to speak. Is there any further discussion from the commission before we proceed with voting or having a motion?
Nothing further. I'm ready to move a motion. I would move that we adopt a resolution, attachment 1, recommending that the City Council take the following actions. 1, find that no further environmental review is required under the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to not sure what that word is supposed to be. Pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15162, subsequent EIRs and negative declarations. And 2, adopt a resolution recommending City Council approval of General Plan Amendment 24-001 based on the findings and conclusions contained in the resolution.
Do we have a second?
No one's moved yet.
No,
Oh, we have to have a first.
yeah, it's, okay. Slight technical hitch here.
Now do we
I set you as mover, Commissioner Lee.
There you go.
Okay, so then. Let the record show a motion was made by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner Mead. Motion carries all ayes.
Okay, now we can move on to item 4B, Planned Unit Development 23-002, consideration of a planned unit development for tracks 32557 and 32558 to modify the approved site and landscape plans to remove the rear and side yard wall requirements for lots within the R1 zoning district and include an internal trail system. We've gotten word from the applicant to request a continuance to the August 21st meeting. So do I need to open the public hearing anyway? Okay. So there's no report. Do I have anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this item?
We have no one wishing to speak.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. And can I get a motion to continue this item to August 21?
So moved.
Let the record show a motion was made by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner Mead to approve the continuance for item 4B. Motion carries all ayes.
Okay, the next item is a tentative parcel map 38903. Approval of a tentative parcel map. Excuse me. Let me start again. Approval of a tentative parcel map to subdivide a developed 1.79 acre commercial plaza into 4 commercial lots and 1 lettered lot located within the MXC mixed-use commercial zoning district, hereafter referred to as the project. We've gotten an email to Mr. Roca that they're asking for a continuance to August 7th.
That is correct.
I'll open the public hearing. If there's anybody here that would like to speak on this item, do we have any speakers?
Do we have anyone in the audience wishing to speak? We have no one looking to speak, Vice Chair.
Okay, then I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion for a continuance to August 7 to 2024.
Okay, let the record show a motion was made by Commissioner Lee, Mead, seconded by Commissioner Lee to approve the continuance for item 4C to August 7th Planning Commission meeting. Motion carries all ayes.
Our next item is a conditional use permit 22-004 to consider a conditional use permit to install a 53-foot-high unmanned wireless communication facility designed as a clock tower, ground-mounted equipment, and landscaping located within the property of the Northgate Community Church. Do we have a staff report? Mr. Roca?
Yes, we do. Good evening, Commissioners and Vice Chair Malakoff. My name is Manuel Rocha, Assistant Planner here at the City of Cathedral City. Today I bring before you conditional use permit number 22004 for a wireless telecommunication facility by the applicant Will Kazemi on behalf on AT&T Wireless. So just a background on this project, an initial public hearing was held for this project back on December 20th, 2023. During this hearing, the Planning Commission voted to continue the public hearing and requested that the applicant find a suitable redesign of the telecommunication antenna to a design that fits in with the community, and to also consider relocating the antenna closer to the church building so that it may be less noticeable. The proposed project is located at 30010 Date Palm Drive within the property of Northgate Community Church. The property is zoned single-family residential with the general plan designation of low-density residential. Here is a view of the location of the proposed wireless telecommunication facility. The proposed facility will be located in the planter area shown here. The telecommunication facility is proposed in the same location as the previous design and maintains the same 948 square foot lease area. The proposed facility includes a ground-mounted equipment closure along with the telecommunications antenna and surrounding landscaping. The equipment plan and landscaping had previously been reviewed during the initial hearing. No changes have been made to either with this redesign. For reference, here you will see the previously proposed antenna design, which was a 50-foot high telecommunications antenna designed as a 3-sided tower. The redesign of the telecommunications antenna is proposed to be disguised as a 53-foot high clock tower. The panels of the clock tower will be painted faint coral with a smooth stucco finish. The clock tower will also contain a metal roof that will be painted rockwood to match the existing church building. To the east of the antenna, there will be an enclosure with a trellis cover that will match the existing trash enclosure on the site. A condition has been added that requires the clock tower to be serviced and properly functioning at all times. Shown here is what would be a view of the telecommunication facility looking southwest from 30th Avenue, and also a view looking southeast from the project site. Shown here are two maps comparing the LTE coverage that currently exists and what would be provided with the installation of the proposed telecommunications facility. The construction of the new antenna would provide a significant increase in indoor signal within close proximity of the antenna. During the Planning Commission hearing on December 20th, 2023, neighboring residents expressed concerns related to possible radiation from a new antenna and voiced their opinion that additional antenna towers, are unnecessary to the area. However, Section 332C7 of the Federal Communications Act limits local and state government regulation of wireless facilities based on environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, as long as the facilities comply with the Commission's regulations concerning such emissions. Additionally, the section prevents unreasonable discrimination among service providers and prohibits regulations that would effectively prevent the provision of wireless services. Therefore, local codes do not regulate the number of telecommunication towers permitted. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission finds the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to section number 15303, class number 3, and approve CUP number 22004, subject to the attached conditions of approval and based on the findings contained in the staff report. That concludes my presentation. Unfortunately, the applicant couldn't be here today, but we do have representatives from the church who are here to answer questions, and I am also available for questions.
Before we go on, I forgot to disclose that I had communication with the church's team, former Mayor DeRosa. I spoke with her about the project, so I just wanted on the record that I had that communication. Does the commission have any questions for staff?
I have a quick question. The illustration, I didn't see this in our packet, but the illustration shows 2 clock faces. Are there going to be 4 clock faces, 2, or is that simply an artist's impression?
My understanding is that there is a clock face on each side.
Okay, and those will be maintained and synchronized?
Correct. And
then the applicant will be responsible for the landscaping and the upkeep. And is that conditioned in the conditions of approval?
Yeah, correct. That is a condition.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are there any, do you have any questions,
Yeah.
Commissioner?
Not to disagree with Danny, but I thought that I saw in the plan that only 3 sides of the clock tower were going to be enclosed and 1 side was going to be open for access, but I couldn't tell from the plans if that was just at the base of the tower or if one whole side was somewhat open for access.
I see. My understanding,
happen to know?
it is 3 sides, but the representatives for the church should be able to answer that question.
Okay. And then I was wondering, I'm guessing no, but do you have any representations that show the church with the clock tower behind it? Obviously, the clock tower is substantially higher, but I'm just wondering if from the street, maybe that height difference is not as noticeable just because of the, the depth perception?
Yeah, so we don't have any renderings in this presentation. However, just for reference, the clock tower is proposed at 53 feet, and the church is a total height of 40 feet.
Oh, it is 40. Okay, I thought it was 30. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Been through a long road on this one. I'll have some comments later. But in my experience dealing with cell companies, this might not seem like it's a good question, but I think it is. Will there be a condition that they actually maintain the clock to make sure it works? Because we don't want the clock just to be right twice a day.
Yeah, correct. And yeah, that is a condition that was
So
included.
that is a condition of approval. Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Rocha. Rocha. So, any more questions for staff? I don't see any more. The applicant, the church is here. I'll open the public hearing. And do we have any questions for the church? The representatives from AT&T are not here. But I'll open the public hearing and we can ask the church any questions that we find deemed important.
Please state your name and city of residence.
I'm Joe Zeneda. I'm the senior pastor, and I live in Cathedral City. Can I just share a few of the process too? Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure.
About 3 years ago, AT&T came to our church. They needed better cell reception in that area, and they checked with a bunch of businesses in the area, found no one was interested and willing to do it. And so they came to the church and said, would you consider doing a service for our community and helping us put a cell tower here? As a church, we cared about the design because we wanted it to be something that fit in with the church and wasn't an eyesore to the community. And so we spent about 3 years now working with them, trying to figure out the right design and the right way to do it. But when we opened the public hearing for people in the community to come out, we were real encouraged. Everyone who came was really in favor of the cell tower because they don't get good reception in those homes behind our church. And so, as well as people in our church expressed, they sometimes with AT&T don't get reception in our church area. So as a church, as our board, we have 2 of our members here as well. As we considered the proposal, we felt like this is a good service to the community. It allows emergency service vehicles as well to be able to get in and out and make sure they have good reception. And so, yeah, that's why as a church we approved it and are trying to move forward with it.
Thank you, Pastor.
Yeah.
So, our first speaker.
Sorry, could I just ask? Could I
Any
just
questions?
ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just quickly, so the land is being leased to AT&T. Is that in perpetuity? How long is the lease?
30-year.
Okay, so it's not going to disappear in a couple of years' time.
No.
The church isn't going to decide, we don't like it after all.
No, and they have to remove it if they decide to remove it, yeah.
All right, okay, thank you.
Have you heard anything from it's not an approved project, but the Wren development to the south of this? Did they contact you or anything about this?
Yeah, and we worked out I think in a future meeting, you'll hear, we worked out a way for their entrance too and some of their designs to really help them move forward. But I think with that community moving in too, you're now need a lot more cell reception with all those apartments going in that area as well, so.
I was just curious.
And they're aware of it, yeah.
If the property owner there had expressed any reservations to you. Thank you. Any questions for this speaker?
No questions, but I just want to make a comment. I live not too far from the church, and I know you guys do a lot for the community between the electronics recycling and the food bank and everything, so I do appreciate that you guys are always kind of looking to help out the community, and this seems like you came from a good place in wanting to do this, so thank
As
you
well
for
as
that.
voting too, we do voting at our church. We really do
Yep.
try to partner
Yes.
with you all. You all do a great job. We just want to be a blessing to the community. Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you. We do have a speaker for this item, Mr. Jamal Khan. Please give us your name and city of residence.
My name is Jamal Khan. I'm resident of Cathedral City, actually the street behind the tower on Alexander Drive.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yeah, I was just mentioning, my name is Jamal Khan. Commissioners, hello. Jamal Khan, Cat City, Cathedral City, and I live on Alexander Drive, one of the houses that would be directly affected with a view of a 53-foot clock tower, cell tower. A little feedback just really quick. The church, I believe, is a 2-story building. And I believe it's probably 30 feet as far as room. I don't know how far the apex of the building goes to, but a 53-foot tower would be quite above the building, if you will. Just giving you a little. Another little feedback is there's already 2 towers in that area. There's one tower on Ramon and San Elige that's connected to the track. And there's another cell phone tower that's on Dave Palm and Vista Chino, right by the Arco gas station. So there's already quite a bit of telecommunication going right there. And last thing on feedback, I have AT&T and I have no problems with my service. 3 of the reasons why I feel like this should be opposed is the health. I have a family. There's a research for children that they're still developing, that the brains of children are still growing. With the RF waves going through the air, they say that you should limit your access to how close you are with that. Having a family has changed my views as I become a father. It's also the school that's less than 100 feet away. There's quite a bit of kids walking every day in that area. If nobody would like to speak up for them, I'd speak up for those kids because that's the next generation. Second thing is the visual impact. The visual impact of a 53-foot tower, as you look outside behind your house, will limit the view of the San Jacinto Mountains. You won't see the mountains, and it could limit the wildlife and everything, having radio waves. The visual impact also is the access point to have service workers work on the cell tower. If you're looking at your backyard and you see a forklift coming through, servicing the clock because it's maybe out of calibration, that could be a little bit of a eyesore. And the third thing is the property devaluation. We had Hurricane Hillary come through and it smashed Cathedral City and the panorama track. It was devastating. I've had some friends that have fire sold their home just to get out of the area because of the flooding and the damage and a lot of pain and suffering. So the last thing I want to say is there is 2 court cases that are currently in process regarding the cell phone towers that are still active currently today that can be used for reference in the future to oppose this. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to speak on this item? Okay, then I will close the public hearing and open discussion among the commissioners. Do I have any comments or questions from the commissioners?
Well, yeah, I'll start. So I was at the previous hearing, and I thought the design was fairly disappointing. It didn't really work with the rest of the neighborhood. And so when I saw this alternate design, I thought this was a lot improved. I still had the same concerns as other people, that it does seem divorced from the actual community of the church. But having said that, I think a standalone clock tower can be architectural in its own right. So there's always concern about this kind of installation in neighborhoods, and I understand that. But I also have to recognize, as we saw in the staff presentation, there are federal limits on what we as a commission can do. So we're not engineers. We don't get to evaluate whether or not an antenna is required for a company, or whether they could share antennas with other people, which they sometimes do. Our standard has always been the monopole, but that wasn't acceptable architecturally to the church, and I think this design is a good compromise all round. So as far as I'm concerned, I think they've met the requirements that we laid down in our previous meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Mead, do you have any comments?
I would second a lot of what Danny just said, and also just say I think the new design is much improved from the original design, and I noted that I think you had mentioned twice in the previous hearing clock towers, and they came back with a clock tower, so good idea on your part. But yeah, I mean, I think I do live in Panorama, so I drive by that corner all the time. You know, no one really likes to see a giant tower, but I think that at least this has some architectural interest, and I'm just hoping that from that corner, because of the kind of depth of it, that the church will somewhat block the tower. I think it's not going to be as obvious from the street as it kind of looks when it's in those renderings. But yeah, I think overall, I think a much better design, and, you know, it seems like it's needed at least for the service in the area, so.
Thank you, Commissioner Mead. I had a great many concerns with this project as it was proposed. But first, let me just start dovetail on something Commissioner Lee said, that you know, the FCC really prevents us from getting into any of those health issues. And they did provide a coverage map which shows what this provider has in the area and the need for it. So it's, the other sites don't really impact what the service of AT&T can provide for the area. Third, our code doesn't really have design standards for this kind of thing. There's very little in our code. So I'm glad that the church and AT&T went back with our suggestions and took them seriously. I think that we're at a point now where there's no place to go because they've taken our comments and they've taken our comments and implemented them. They're also incorporating the church's concerns. And I think this is a place where I'd like it to be more incorporated into closer to the building, but I don't see that happening at this point. So I think we're at a point where I don't think anything else will change. And also, I think that we've had a chance to give significant input, and I would hate to see AT&T play a card with the FCC and bypass us completely where we don't have any comments or any input. So I think it's important that we take into consideration what's been proposed. And I think that we're at a point where this is the best project we're going to get. It'll work for the church. It's architecturally much better than what we saw before. And they've done everything they can at this point. So I appreciate the church taking our our concerns seriously, and I appreciate AT&T doing the clock tower. Sometimes they want to look at the bottom line and not provide something architecturally significant. So it means something that they were able to provide something more than just like a water tower or something like that. So I agree with the group, and I think this is a good place for a motion, and I support this. And do I have a motion?
I can move. If I can get back to the screen. There we go. So I move that we adopt a notice of exemption, finding the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the state CEQA guidelines and Section 15315, Class Number 15, minor land divisions, and approve tentative parcel map. I'm on the wrong one here. Yeah, how did that happen? Scrap that. I never said a word.
Yeah, I think you read the wrong.
Yeah. I'm challenged by
The screen. So
I'm challenged by the computer tonight.
would you like me to read that?
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
All right.
Why don't we do that in future?
Commissioner Lee to approve an exemption to the California Environmental Quality CEQA pursuant to section number 15303, class number 3, new construction or conversion of small structures, and approve conditional use permit number 22-004, subject to the attached conditions of approval and based on the findings contained in the staff report. No wonder you had a problem. That was a mouthful.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we have, hold on, let me stop that. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So we opened the vote and you guys all voted. So, yeah, a motion was made by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner, or Vice Chair Malakoff, sorry, to approve that. Motion carries all ayes.
I'd like to thank the church for coming tonight, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Khan for participating in the public process. Our next item is a non-public hearing item that I think we're all looking forward to, the zoning code update. And can you give me your name one more time?
Staff member Cynthia Schultz, Associate Planner.
Your, can you give me your name one more time?
Cynthia.
I was talking to you. So
Yeah,
can you-
she said.
Cynthia?
Oh, okay. You can provide the staff report.
Certainly. Let me get the slideshow started here for you all. So again, staff member, Associate Planner Cynthia Schultz. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. Tonight I have a presentation and an update for you all and seeking some guidance as we move forward with the zoning code update. It's a pretty major, substantial code update, an update to our municipal code, and we would like to get some feedback from you. So I'll talk a little bit about, first of all, why we need the code update, what it will include, what it will entail, and about how long that will take. So our code right now really was adopted back in the 80s. It's quite old. It is part of our municipal code, so it is officially, it is law. We have standalone design guidelines that sit outside of our code. That sit outside of our that sit outside of our municipal code, but they're referred to on all of our projects as well. The code is, as I mentioned, it's outdated. It needs some modernization. It's not flexible, and it can become a deterrent to development rather than a facilitator of development. So it can be a difficult thing to get through. We are sitting at the crux of an opportunity in the city right now, because other Coachella Valley cities are also going through this. We can watch and learn what's happening in other places, but what we've also heard loud and clear from City Council is that we want to be competitive with our other valley cities as well as within the larger region. We do need to be modern. We also need to be competitive within the state in many different ways. So in order to do that, we really need to modernize our code. It's going to be a full-on rewrite of the code and not piecemealing and trying to fix what we have. I put these up here simply because these are goals and objectives that came out of the City Council's strategic plan that was adopted this year. I'm not going to go through them, but what I do want to point out is that very first one, Goal C8, talks about a process that is more facilitative versus regulatory. We really want to be able to usher in development, good development, well thought out development that provides a good product so that we can become a distinguished and unique cathedral city that is competitive within the region. So one relationship I wanted to point out is the relationship between the general plan and the zoning code are two separate things. The vision that's stated in the general plan is a long-term, long-range vision. What do we want to look like? How do we want to operate? Where do we want to go when we grow up? That's what that entails, and it includes all of the general plan elements. The zoning code is the vehicle for how we get to that point. It's the vehicle for how we get there. So this is not in any way trying to revision what's in the general plan. It's just to help implement the vision that's in the general plan. Think of the zoning code update really as a process. We estimate it'll take from beginning to end 18 to 24 months. We really want to stay on target, and part of the point of why we're doing this is so that we can get your feedback. We can bring the feedback from the different boards and committees to the City Council and ask them to sort of select the top 3 to 5 policy, practice, procedure priorities that we will end up putting into the scope of work that will then go forward into the request for proposals so that we can select the most competitive and most appropriate consultant. We don't necessarily want to go with the cheapest one, but because we do have limited resources, limited time, and we don't want this process to in any way sort of get sidetracked, we really want to make sure that we're on task. So that's why we're doing this. We're doing this a little bit differently from maybe how some cities might do it. But like I said, we want to make sure that we're using our resources as best that we can. We also will have an online and in-person public engagement process, as well as engaging both a steering committee and a technical advisory committee. Here's just a general timeline that will get us up to launching that RFP. We have to get that launched shortly after we have our meeting with City Council, assuming that the objectives and the goals and policy choices are clear. If we can get that launched mid-August, we hope that we would have a consultant selected, interviewed, selected, and chosen by early October. I want to thank you all for taking the time. I know it was a lengthy survey, even though there were only 6 questions on that survey. I know it was lengthy, and there was a lot of thought that went into that, so I really want to thank everybody. I will go through the 6 questions, the results of all 6 questions, talk a little bit more about that, and then tease out one of the answers, and then to former commissioners, Mr. Daly's comments. The one on housing struck a lot of interest, so I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about that one. So the first question in that survey was really about design guidelines and where should they apply. We clearly see that we had a unanimous response that yes, they should apply to downtown Cathedral City, but they maybe should also apply to our multifamily residential projects as well as to our commercial and mixed use projects. This is a question that comes up because as we do apply regulations, it can make things more costly and it can take more time. But at the same time, how do we help facilitate projects that maybe are really hitting the mark, and how do we maybe be able to review certain targeted projects at a staff level versus having to bring things to the Architectural Review Committee and forward to the Planning Commission. That can add time, and that can add cost, and it can also add uncertainty to the process. So we're looking at how we can not only do this quicker, but not to sabotage that process by making, in any way, shape, or form, how do we make that development also better? So I think design guidelines are one way to do that. And what we're seeing here, I think, from the responses, if you can see that, excuse me, somehow this inset is in here. We sent the survey out. I sent it out to 21 individuals. I had 13 unique anonymous responses that came back. So from 13 of the 21, we got pretty substantial support for having design guidelines. The second question really talked about what type of design guidelines. So there are kind of two ways to look at design guidelines. And as I mentioned earlier, our design guidelines are sitting outside of our municipal code, so they're guidelines, they're not standards. We could have what we'd call a unified development code where the zoning code, the design standards, and development standards are all codified into one sort of municipal code item where all of that development regulation is all housed in one place. Right now, it is not like that. Should we do that? Is that something that we're looking at doing? And if we do that, or if we don't do that, either way, what type of design guidelines do we want? Do we want them to be more flexible, more subjective, which opens them up to a little bit to more interpretation, a little bit more flexibility, and a little bit more uncertainty? Or do we like them to be objective? Objective carries its own pros and cons, but I think what we see in the results here is we see straight up support for objective design guidelines with, some support as well for subjective design guidelines with a little more disagreement that design guidelines should be subjective. And I think this reflects the sentiment that we really want things to be predictable, taking out some of the subjectivity of the determination through that process. We really like to know what is being expected of our developers up front. The response that's in the center of this table talks about what we call an alternative equivalent compliance, which means that if an application comes through and say that application does not meet all of the boxes, right? It doesn't maybe hit all of the compliance markers, that there would be a way for something that seems like a really great project on its surface, but maybe it's not tripping those measures, for it to come through an alternative compliance and demonstrate that it does meet the intent of the code through some other measure. That got support here, and it also got support in the next question. The reason I asked that question two ways is that I wanted to make sure that we were understanding what that meant. We definitely got support for that. So here you will see it. The third question talks about development standards, which are different from design guidelines. Development standards are things like density, things like lot coverage, setbacks, things of that nature. Here we see that red bar, 13 out of 13 said, yeah, we want that alternative compliance option. So that sounds like that's a clear winner. The other areas where we did get support are the blue and orange bars, and that we're looking at where development standards would be specific to either the zoning district or the geographic location. So it could maybe be the downtown, it could maybe be an uptown area, or it could be we want development standards that differ between residential, commercial, mixed use, and so on. There's some other options in here as well, things like spacing between uses that didn't get a lot of support, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. But if you have any questions about any of these before I continue moving on, I will open up for discussion at the end, but if there's any question on how these are being interpreted or being described, I'm happy to answer those questions. And then, let's see.
I'm sorry, were you saying you want questions as you go along, or?
If you have questions for clarification, I didn't say that at the beginning, but yeah, I would welcome those questions before I get to the end. But if you want to talk about certain specific items, then we'll wait until the end.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right, so moving to the fourth item, economic development and infill opportunities. As I said, one of the things the city's really looking for is to try to become a leader in how do we attract good quality economic development, primary jobs, jobs that pay well, that support a family, that make people want to raise their children here and settle in this community. You know, I hear this all the time. This is the place where I came, moved, bought my house, raised my family. That's the vision I think that the city wants to maintain. In order to do that, we need to have primary jobs. We need to have housing for folks. So what this question is asking about is, we've got a lot of vacant properties, we've got a lot of vacant buildings. Where are the opportunities lying, and what are the tools that we can use to bring those opportunities forward to the city for development or for reuse, redevelopment or reuse? Some of those options include reduced parking standards, flexible parking standards. Both of those items got very good support. The other one was to assess our downtown and mixed use downtown uses to make sure that they're appropriate for what we allow there. So right now, all of our zoning districts talk about what is allowed and what's not allowed. We want to make sure that those are calibrated appropriately so that we're allowing the proper mix of uses either by right or with some sort of a conditional permit. We had moderate support for expedited review of mixed use or infill that includes some housing or neighborhood level services. We wanted to talk about this a little bit because, you know, we have a lot of opportunities for mixed use, but we don't see a lot of mixed use proposals come forward. Most of it is straight commercial or straight residential. How do we encourage those uses? Are there tools that we can do that with? Didn't include any of those slides, but I think we can get to that at a future moment as well. Tonight we're really talking more about higher level policy priorities, and at some point when we get deeper into the weeds on this and when we have more workshops, we'll parking lot some of those ideas and get back to them. And then we also had some modest support to low support for sort of administrative or staff level approvals. One of the things that we've also talked about is how can we streamline some of these processes as we bring these projects forward to either the Planning Commission or the Architectural Review Committee. There's public notice that's required, and it can't, you know, because you have not a meeting every single day, thank goodness, but it can slow down a process. The fifth question, and this one we'll dig a little bit deeper on, is about housing. Housing is a hot topic. It's a hot topic here. It's a hot topic everywhere, all around the world. It is a hot topic. What are some of the tools? I put pro housing on here, and I actually lifted these tools that are listed here as options. I pulled those directly from the California Housing Community Development Department because they called them pro housing tools. And so what we're looking at here are any of these of interest? Do we get some support for this? If we want to try to bring in more housing, can we use some of these tools? What's the interest level for some of these? So I want to dig a little bit deeper in here. I'm just going to take this opportunity. We don't have to debate all of these tonight, but I do want to get you all thinking, get your brains sort of warmed up to the idea of how can we try to encourage incremental density? How can we try to encourage gentle density? How can we try to bring in development that isn't going to be jarring to the neighborhood, that isn't going to make the community look like it's, from the Jetsons age? It really needs to blend in. How do we do that? What are the tools? I think some of the images that I'll show will show some ways that other communities have done that, and it will also highlight one of the standards that we've talked about internally, and I think what you'll see in the images is the importance of good landscaping. The importance of good landscaping cannot be understated, and I think you'll see that when you're looking at some of these courtyards and other things where there's clearly the building is different from what's around it, but the landscape helps really soften that feature along the streetscape. So some of these tools that are shown here, the one that receives the orange bar is creating a ministerial review process for housing of a certain type, whether that be five-plexes or small apartment buildings or whatever that may be. And a ministerial approval is an in-house approval. It doesn't come to any decision-making body, but that's a straightforward approval. Once they check all the boxes, they can move on to their building permit and move forward. So that's something that we really would like to move forward with, but we really need to partner that with some of these other tools of how can we help promote some of that gentle density or more density than that. So let me show you some examples. I'll show you some examples from other communities. This one's former single-family homes that have been developed into duplex and a triplex. These are in the San Diego area. Here's an example from Palm Springs of a duplex on the top, and then there's a triplex here as well. So these are just some examples of what's typically allowed and how some of those things can take on very different forms, some of them more traditional and some of them definitely pushing the envelope on what we can do with design. You can see in these Palm Springs example, that house is set very far back on that lot, whereas in the triplex on the maybe the same size lot, that building is brought all the way out, almost all the way out to the driveway, and that looks like that could even be an alleyway access. So they're really using a lot more of that lot to cover with development. I'm not suggesting that any of these are right or wrong. I'm just saying that there's different ways to do this. On the top, you'll see an example, and I believe that example is actually from Canada, of an infill duplex, and that duplex actually has, each of those duplex units has an ADU, so I think it's actually a fourplex on that lot. It's a single-family lot infill, mid-block in a residential lot, in a residential neighborhood. And then there's a fourplex shown there. And I like that fourplex example because it looks like a single-family home. It's a large single-family home, but it actually has 4 units inside of it. So it doesn't look like it, but it does. So this is another infill fourplex, and this is just a different way to slice up the sections of the building. So we have a front-to-back, alley-loaded, and street-loaded with side-to-side, and then each unit has 2 floors. Then there's also a triplex on the right-hand side. And the reason I like this triplex, I'm not crazy about how it sits with the context of this neighborhood, but the triplex brings up a good question that, if we are going to push the envelope on design and we are going to make ministerial, in-house, where it's just a staff level review, we'll have to do a deeper review of these projects to make sure that we are ensuring privacy for our neighbors, ensuring that the community feels okay. If someone is building this, think of it as someone is building this next to me, I want to make sure they're not looking over at me and my, family having a barbecue or swimming in the pool or whatever that is. So it will take a little bit deeper level of a review. Here are some courtyard housing options. So these are typically on either single-family lots or a square lot, which would be a combination of 2 or potentially 3 single-family lots as they stand. These are both cottage courts. I'm not sure how many units are in the first one on the left is from Palm Springs. The other one, I'm not sure where that one is, but I think that one on the right is 10 or 12 units. And there's just smaller units, but it's like almost like a mini hotel with a walk-up in the center. It's a very popular way of doing sort of apartment building housing back in the early 20th century. Here's another example of that, and I like this one in here because it shows the site layout in that axionometric view there. And this one's in Santa Monica. It was built in 1920, and it became famous because it had fallen into very bad disrepair. I mean, people were burning fixtures and, to keep the heat in the house. And someone bought it back in the 70s, and it became the Santa Monica's first national landmark back in 1977. So from grandeur to being torn off the walls to being a national landmark. So that's what you can do. Again, another courtyard example. This, I think, is a great example of what can happen with those canopy trees, with good landscaping. It's so much about the treatment of the site, the development standards, it's the design guidelines, it's how we work that site and how that site is developed and proposed that really makes the difference between something that might be a little bit less community forward and something that might fit very well in with an existing neighborhood. And then I included the multifamily building that's to the right. Don't know how many units is in that building, but again, it looks like a very large single-family building. You can't tell that that's an apartment building, but that is what it is. A couple of a little bit different ideas for housing. On the left, we have a courtyard mini home. Those are probably 400 or 500 square feet for units. They are detached they're almost like a park model home, but they're small units, maybe a one-bedroom or even a studio unit in those. And it's all set around a central courtyard type of setting. And then the one on the right, what looks like two single-family homes is actually 5 units, and they're sitting on 2 single-family lots. So what they did is they just built into the back of the home, but from the streetscape, it looks just like any other home on the block. Here are some other examples of when I Googled the term gentle density, I get a lot of different examples. I like these particular examples because it's looking at the site in a 3-dimensional way. The one on the left is looking at the site in a 3-dimensional way to kind of get an idea of what we could do with, single-family lot or 2 single-family lots, or a traditional kind of an infill site that we might have in the city. Even on that particular one, there could be a mixed use that might have some commercial in the front and then some residential in the back. That would be terrific. It would be a great achievement for the city if we could get more of that type of development here. How do we encourage that? How do we bring that? How do we attract that here so that it's not going somewhere else? We don't want that to leak to another community. What are the goodies that we need to bring to the table? The one on the right-hand side, I'm using as sort of an example of what we can do in terms of incremental improvement, incremental density, where I had come from, they had done incremental height. Essentially what they were doing is they were allowing height to move up in a gradual way. So what used to be a 30-foot or 40-foot, 35-foot height limitation, they said, well, we'll lift the height ceiling, we'll lift maximum height by 20 feet, but you're going to have to get there in small increments over time, and it's going to be in conjunction with what's next door to you. So you're not going from a 20-foot building to a 50-foot. You might go from 20 to 30, and from 30 to 40, and 40 to 50, but you can't get all the way up there from here. It's going to have to be gradual and over time. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, but it's an example of one creative way to get from where we are today, which is we're really struggling with getting housing here, to maybe gradually increasing the intensification of the housing without shocking, disturbing, upsetting, the neighbors and the existing community fabric that we have in the city. I included some tables in here so that you could get an idea of what types of housing are allowed in the zoning districts that we have in the city, and then what the maximum density is. Now, the ones that have the stars by them, which is most of them, those are all maximum densities that are allowed, and they're just based on other things that might be required from the site. But it does show that, single-family dwellings are allowed. There are some other types of dwellings, that are allowed, as far as like a 2-family dwelling or even a multifamily dwelling that are allowed by right. They may still have to go through architectural review, which isn't as time consuming as if, say, they needed to have a conditional use permit, but it still does add time and money to this. Is there any way that we can push some of these housing types that are preferable? Is there a way that we can push some of these down to a staff level approval? Good question. I will also show you some images of some projects that we had approved recently, and think of them through the lens of, can we potentially approve some of these projects at a staff level? I included this slide, and I'm not going to read all of that, but I included this slide just because I pulled these policies right out of the housing element, and the housing element really talks about, again, the words incentivizing and the words, how do we encourage, how do we attract, how do we become more competitive, how can the city put together sets of incentives that are really a trade-off. It's not just incentives that we're going to throw out there and not get anything for, but hey, if we want more of this gentle density, or if we want more mixed use, what can we give to you, or put in your swag bag, so to speak, to get you to bring that development to us? So, and how do we get you here versus going somewhere else? So here are some examples of proposals or developments that are in some stage of the process or completed or under review, final review for their building permits that have been approved recently for multifamily. But again, think about these in terms of the lens of, is this something that ARC and Planning Commission need to look at? Or are these things that maybe we could push down to a staff level for an approval? So the first one is Newport 17. Newport 17 is off of Date Palm, just south of 33rd. It was 17 units on 1.5 acres. It achieved 11 units per acre. And these are the drawing elevations of that particular project. That project started in, I think the approval was back in 2022, and they have received their building permit. The second one is Canyon Springs Villas. This is 58 units on 3.5 acres, the southeast side of Cathedral Canyon and Ramon Road. 3.5 acres. It's zoned R3. It's a 2-story apartment building, and they've achieved a little bit higher density at 16 units per acre. And I should say with that first one, the Newport 17, I think those are single unit apartments, so they're not stacked on top of each other like these are. There's benefit to having that, and that's an interesting housing product. It's a lot like those courtyard units that we were looking at. So again, not saying that one is better than the other. It's, people like to have choices, and the more choices that we can provide to people, I think the better off that we are. Here's another project that was just approved recently. This was the Grove Apartments, 19 units on just under 3/4 of an acre, vacant infill lot right in our downtown. Great location, but they took a smaller lot and are able to achieve 28 units on that acre. Again, they checked all the boxes. They met the parking standard. They did the landscape standard. The facade was articulated all the way around. Is this a project that maybe did not need to come forward to ARC and to Planning Commission for its final approval? Is this something that perhaps staff could have approved, and maybe we could have saved a few months of time off of them? And more importantly, could we have provided a little bit more certainty through the process to the developer? Certainty is one of the biggest things that we hear with developers, is that any risk or any uncertainty that they have is very costly and time consuming. Again, the trade-off, we have to make sure that we're mindful and cognizant of the balance of making sure that the development is absolutely top-notch. If we don't do that, we lose that distinguishedness, we lose the competitiveness, we lose all the things that we've been fighting for. And then the last example that I'll show you is Cathedral Town Villas. These are right here next to City Hall. They achieved 61 units on 1.31 acres. This one's zoned similarly to the last one in terms of how the zoning is calculated. What's interesting about this site, and I think this is terrific, is they were able to push up some density by having three levels, and then they also pushed some of their parking under the building, so they were able to park all the required cars on the site. There isn't on-street parking in this area, so this was good. There is some on-street parking a part of the site, but there's not enough to support this apartment building. So 46 units an acre is quite a great improvement over where we started at 11. Again, this one checked all the boxes. Could this have been something that might be approved by staff? So with that, I'll go on to the sixth question. I know I kind of went through those a little bit fast, but I just wanted to give you kind of some idea of some of the challenges that we are seeing with housing, and because housing ended up as our #1 priority policy of the 13 responses that came back. I did include how those top 5 items were ranked, and I think that was important to provide some transparency. I didn't score these. This was scored by Microsoft Forms. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of how the other things stacked up, and that, there are a lot of important competing policies here. It's all important. What do we want to prioritize? If we can somehow, getting back to why we're doing this tonight, if we can somehow package this scope of work in an RFP that says this is what we really want to focus on, we'll focus on the other things that come out as important. We'll kind of put those in the parking lot and make sure that we build those into the scope, into the zoning code up into the zoning code as we go along at some place in the code, whether that come as a sort of an add-on or a module that gets added to the zoning code update, but we really need to stay front and center with the items that absolutely need to be, and what those items needs to be, again, really the main focus of our scope of work in that RFP. So with that, I think that really concludes my presentation. Questions, comments, we're looking from you tonight. Throw out what priorities you either saw in the slideshow, what the housing items really are that you want to deal with, or if housing isn't even on your radar, what is? Let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
That
Ms.
was a lot.
Schultz. We appreciate your presentation. Now we'll have staff questions and our comments. Commissioner Mead, do you?
I have a bunch. I mean, is this our primary opportunity to give you feedback before you do the RFP? Do you want, I mean, because I've been making notes throughout your.
It really is the primary opportunity to do that. So
I just didn't want to
yeah.
go too far if this was just supposed to be initial feedback.
Yes, and I'm glad that you asked that question because I didn't want to provide too much information. But yes, what I'll be doing is aggregating all the comments. This is the third and final board before I take the comments to City Council next month. So we'll aggregate the comments, but then we'll kind of try to package them together and say, this is kind of what bubbled up to the surface as the top priorities that we'd like you to focus on. Ultimately, they'll get all the information. They could completely go off the script anyway. So, but I'm sure they will want to know what you all want to prioritize.
Okay. So, I mean, I will preface this by saying that I moved here 3 years ago from Los Angeles, which is in a completely different situation building-wise. It's completely built. So everything that is being built there now requires tearing something down that's already there. So seeing that as the future of where Cathedral City could eventually be, my comments really come from let's not end up there. Because one of the reasons I moved here is because of my frustration with what was happening in LA. And I think on a grand scale, I would say they forgot they were LA. And their entire zoning, in my perspective, everything became, how can we be more like New York? Okay. So so that's it's just to give you some context, just so you understand maybe where I'm coming from a little bit. So I would love to see us grow in a really smart, sustainable, creative, flexible way that maybe doesn't end up in a situation where 20 years from now we're tearing down affordable units to build high rises that are market rate units with no new affordable units, because that's what's happening in some of the bigger cities. So I would say, to your point about pro-housing, yes, we need more housing, absolutely. And I think that's extremely important, but housing for housing's sake doesn't necessarily achieve the goals of getting housing for people of different family sizes, different income levels. So I think it's important to always take into account, are we building, when we're building multi-unit buildings like some of the ones you showed, are we building 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms for people with families, making sure that down the road we don't end up with families leaving Cathedral City, especially since we are known for being such a family-friendly city. I liked what you said about design guidelines. I think if the city puts in really strong design guidelines, and I am one who does think there can be some flexibility there, but I think the better our design guidelines and landscaping guidelines are, then that does maybe give us some flexibility to have some things more ministerial. I mean, my concern with ministerial is that it takes away transparency and from the public, and sometimes if they're too broad and you don't have good design standards, you can end up with a very big mishmash of things and projects being approved that people feel like they had no ability to ask questions or give input on. So I think it's, if you can really nail down, hey, we all know what's going to go in this spot because we can see what the design guidelines are and we can all feel very confident in them, then I have less concerns about things just being approved at the staff level. One thing I also wanted to mention is as the city does plan for the next 20, 40 years, however long we think the zoning code update is going to last, to make sure that we also are thinking about services and resources that will be needed to meet the needs of increased density. So if we're talking about taking a single-family home and turning it into a fourplex or adding ADUs, do we have the water capacity? Do we have the electric capacity? All those sort of things. I know, having gone through the Hollywood Community Plan update, those things were always, when we get there, we'll do it. And that's literally what was in the plan. But that doesn't make people feel confident when you're saying, hey, we're going to add 200,000 housing units, but we have no plan for increasing fire, police, right? So I think that makes, knowing that we're working on that as well, and that we can grow those services and we'll have the budget to grow those services as we increase density is important. I liked what you said about the gradual increase in height. I thought that was a really creative solution to increasing heights without things looking too out of place. Sort of akin to that kind of concept, I would love to see something in the zoning code that sort of encouraged us to build where there's nothing built now before we start adopting higher density. Not before we start adopting higher density projects, but before we go too crazy with height increases or height variances or FAR variances, just because I think we have the room to grow a little bit now, but maybe we somehow tie those two things together where we say as the city gets more built out, then there's the ability to introduce more flexibility in terms of density and height. But that we don't go from right now where people could build on an empty lot, but instead they could build, like you said, one of those cute little courtyard buildings, which are all over LA. But instead they're going to build a 4-story, right? We don't need to go necessarily to there yet, it seems like. So maybe somehow figuring out a way to gradually roll that in. Sorry, I'm taking long. I'm almost done. And also, I think that was everything. And families, again, just making sure we have a good mix of units and housing types, and that we're not always forcing families into little boxes, that they have outdoor space. And like you mentioned, landscaping and things like that, that outdoor space is really important as you do multifamily or multi-unit construction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Mead, for those very insightful comments. Commissioner Lee.
Gee, I wish I'd gone first. So yeah, I think Commissioner Mead has been reading my notes. So I do agree with pretty much all those points. I'll just see if there are some other things. Well, first I just wanted to check on process. You mentioned right at the beginning that there will be a steering committee, presumably after the RFP is issued.
Yes, there will be. We're planning on having a steering committee. I know that we've got some interest in that, and I'm not sure who all or how that's going to work, but yeah, we're looking at having a steering committee.
Does anybody know who's going to be represented in that, Sandra?
I don't think we've gotten that far yet. We haven't really gotten that far as how the makeup would be.
Okay. I'm fishing, of course, for whether or not the commission will have some input.
Well, yes, we do anticipate that there will be a body that's made up of commissioners, possibly council, possibly ARC, so different committees would potentially make up one of these working groups.
Okay. Let me just cover the sort of idea of ministerial. In many respects, I like the idea of us getting to some objective standards which can be administered ministerially. And a lot of the work coming out of Sacramento, of course, has forced us into that with things like ADUs and lot splits and so on. My only concern about that is, American paranoia, which is who polices the police, So how would we ensure that those objective standards are really being objective, and not that some companies, for example, are able to influence that process? So I think there need to be some controls. I do like the idea, but it could under some circumstances, run away with us. In terms of the plan, what will be our update process for this? So if we've got all these different objective standards, how would we get those updated if they're not really working for the city? Is that going to be a long process as it has been with this?
Oh, so in terms of, and I think we had a question from another board, on the same type of thing, what's it going to take to change this? It's sort of like how long is a piece of string? It depends on kind of how bad the problem is, how quickly it rises to the level of, hey, we need to write a zoning code amendment to this. I wouldn't say the zoning code amendment is easy. It isn't, but it is doable. Again, depending on what level of importance that rises to. If it's kind of just an aggravation, pebble in your shoe sort of thing, it may not get to the level of we need to change it. It's not broken enough. And I hate to say that, but that's sort of the nature of how a zoning code ends up in a situation where it is 45 years later where we're saying, oh my goodness. And we've amended it through the years, right? So it's just the practical reality of having a law like this, and it does have to go through a public process and get an ordinance passed to change it.
Okay.
If I could add on to that response.
It's the voice of God.
Sorry for just looming over your meeting. In cities that I've worked in the past, we've had sort of an annual update or an annual process to make revisions or modifications to the code. And that may be something for us to think about in the future. I think we're well past that point with the current zoning code, but it's something we should think about in the future, that as we observe parts of the code that are not working right, that we take time to evaluate what changes or modifications we need to make that course correction or change. I think that's a very good practice that we should bring to Cathedral City and something that we should do on an annual basis moving forward. And I do want to go back to the comments about the ministerial process too. And my comment to the commission is, at this point, let's keep an open mind. There's a lot of good solutions out there, a lot of ways that we can still maintain that openness and that transparency. Something that I've seen in another community actually was sort of a ratification of an administrative approval that was on the consent calendar of the Planning Commission. So, not saying that it was a public hearing or that there was a substantial review, but rather that there was a memo prepared by staff in that city where they documented how the decision was made by staff and provided a copy of the plans. Not saying that that's the solution here, but I would like to say, no, let's keep an open mind. I think as we go through this process, we're going to learn a lot, we're going to discover a lot, and I think we can work to satisfy some of the concerns that have come up from the commission this evening.
Yeah, well, thank you. I come from a computer background, actually, and one of the things that evolved in computing over the years was we went from these very, very long, complex processes, developing systems, to what they call agile design or rapid design, and so you need to be able to respond to issues when they're just not working. And of course, we're going to have a lot of new standards here. I mean, we're throwing the old book out, getting a new one. And so I anticipate that with the best will in the world, there will be things that we didn't anticipate. And so I don't know if we need to include a one-year review or something of the whole standard after it's implemented, or so that we can go back and say, what did we get right and what is still a problem? Yeah.
I think that's a good benchmark for the commission, and that is staff. We may not have the consultant on board at that point, but as staff, that is something that we can commit to do, working with the commission and the council, that we do that assessment, that we do that review of the code to ensure that it's doing what we said it was going to do, that it met the expectations, that it is working to the degree that we sought through this process. And I do want to go back to Commissioner Mead's comments too. The zoning code itself is an implementation of the general plan, and we have an adopted general plan of a certified housing element. Much of what we're talking about here is the implementation, the execution of that. And we're not changing the overall vision of the city. So the vision is the vision that is expressed in the general plan and our housing element.
So, continuing on again about density, and I agree with the point that it would be nice to use undeveloped land for some of these higher density populations. For example, Rio Vista, we just amended that, so the lot sizes were reduced, and they got rid of the alleyways and so on. So, you know, we did increase density there, and I think it's appropriate because it's a virgin site, and that's somewhere where it can easily be done in a consistent manner in a large development. I'm not sure, being in a single-family home, I want a 4-story building put up next to me, So there's going to be that issue with infill, that we don't want to have jarring results compared to the surrounding area. So it can certainly push those boundaries, but I lived in San Diego, I didn't, you did. I lived in San Jose, and what happened there was in the subdivision I lived in, they had this overbuilding of properties. People were buying small 1,500 square foot properties and building 4,000 foot mansions on those same lots, and we need to be careful that we retain why people are here in the first place. As Commissioner Mead said, she moved here because it has a certain character, and I think I did too. And so, however those design guidelines are produced, I think we need to be careful that we can not completely restrict, but be respectful of the environment that we've got. The other thing on density, before I forget that, it's fine increasing density, and I think we need another 2,000 homes, I think, in the housing element, something like that. And we certainly want to get those built. But at the same time, if you put the density up in existing areas, you force things like parking back on the streets, which residents will complain about, or you increase the density of people who are occupying the same parks and facilities. So, we also need to be aware of that as we try and resolve that issue. And just generally the local infrastructure, I think we have to be careful of that. And honestly, I could probably talk for another hour, and you don't want to hear me do that, so I'll pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. I have some comments also. Some of them I might have to dovetail on what Commissioner Mead and what Commissioner Lee said. I think my first comment is, when you look at development codes and you look at how planners do things, I've been in planning for quite some time, and one of the things that causes setbacks in every community I've ever worked in is that every time there's a budget issue, first place they cut is planning. And I understand why sometimes. In fact, I really don't. But I think, though, that really hurts the overall community, because every time they devastate a planning and building department, then you take 2 or 3 steps back in what you want to achieve in the future. So I think it's important to maintain a well-staffed planning and building department so you can keep moving forward. It's not all about finance and police and fire. Those are important, but you have to have a well-maintained planning and building department so that you can keep the community looking good. And it relates back to the broken window theory. If you see a broken window, it has a snowball effect on the community. When it comes to design standards, I'd like to see more design standards. And I think a good example is what we looked at tonight, that there were no design standards for for the cell tower, and I'd like to see specific design standards with a little bit of flexibility for corporate themes, because some corporations have their own kinds of architecture. So we need to have room for that. But I would like to see some, more specific design standards than we have now. Also, I'd like to see, when we talk about streamlining, you have to be careful. Streamlining and ministerial kind of go together. My big concern, which Commissioner Mead kind of said, is the transparency and also the ability for the public to participate. So if you were to live next to a 25-acre lot, and let's say that, I would hope this wouldn't happen, that you could put high-density, 5-story apartments there, and then the people that live next door to that wouldn't have any input. And I think that goes against the Brown Act and everything about California. I mean, I came from Florida where, you don't have those kinds of public hearing requirements. So I worry when you say ministerial that the public input would get cut off. I'd also like to see a process for abandoned buildings. When you have a building that hasn't been in use for a long time, that there be some minimum standard of, to bring it up to standard and bring in improvements. And if they haven't made any general plan designations, general plan dedications, that those be made at that time. So that as we progress and buildings get used, that we improve. Otherwise, it's going to take 3 times as long for us to move forward. So that's why I think abandoned buildings need to have a specific process. Another good example for streamlining is, every time we see a used goods public hearing for, a store like Revivals, it's the same exact conditions of approval, it's the same exact issues. We could streamline something like that and have it in the code, what the requirements are, and it could be an administrative action. And then the public doesn't lose anything, and we're giving businesses that want to go into certain kinds of businesses, it'll say in the code, that's what you need to do. We talked about that 20 years ago, and it never happened. But that's a good example of the kind of streamlining that we could have. Also, going back with design standards, I'd like to see some distance requirements, especially for sensitive uses like places of worship. I don't think that we have any distance requirements for cannabis facilities and places of worship, and there probably should be. So I'd like to see that. And also, maybe distance requirements for certain uses from 111, because, every city in the valley has a very, they're very strict on what goes on what happens on 111, and we should be too. For instance, in Palm Desert, every 2 years they argue over having drive-throughs on the 111. They don't have any drive-throughs on the 111. Now, whether I agree with that or not is another story, but they've maintained that policy. We should have certain land uses that belong on the 111 or things that should be a certain distance away. I'd like to see an appeal process that's more specific. I think it's not very clear how people appeal things and who can appeal them. Another thing, again, it can be used to be generic in the RFP. About 20 years ago, we actually had a battered spouse shelter here. And it was a very difficult process because it wasn't in the code. And it also was difficult because if you don't know anything about a battered spouse shelter, they really don't want people to know where they are. They really can't have people knowing where they are because then they can't operate the way they need to operate. And we went through a process here where we tried to have a conditional use permit on it, and they were trying to be secretive and open at the same time, and it just kind of didn't work. Now the shelter that was here is no longer here, so that's why I can mention it. But I think that there's social needs that should be reflected that also could be subject to streamlining, and that's one of them, that if a battered spouse shelter finds a location that they want to go, that should be an administrative process for them to go, and then we're serving a very serious social need. Also, when you're talking about high density for extra housing, everybody's talking about extra housing, having more housing. But it seems to me that in not just our community, but in a lot of communities, that the high density goes into one area of the city and it's not spread out equally. It needs to be thought of so that there's an equal amount of high density throughout the city, not just in one area. It kind of makes me think, I'm getting into planning minutia, but there was a case in New Jersey called Mount Laurel versus, I forgot who it was, Mount Laurel versus the state of New Jersey. And what they came out of with that was that the high density and the low income housing had to be spread out throughout the state and not centered in certain places. And I think we need to make sure that all parts of the city have high density opportunities, not just a few. You mentioned parking, and parking is very difficult because it's transforming every day. There's different kinds of parking needs now, and people are driving, RV vehicles, and then they're driving mini cars. But I think we need to modernize our parking and have more flexible parking. I know that some of the uses that are listed in the code and what the parking requirements are kind of extravagant compared to what you would think of today. And they don't require the kind of parking that you might have needed 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I think we really need to think about that. And then lastly, I think I did say this, I talked about ministerial scares me a little bit. Just like Commissioner Mead said, that I don't want to cut people out of the process because I think that's one of the great things in California. Yeah, I am repeating myself, I'm sorry. I said that earlier, so we need to be real careful with the ministerial process. And that's my list, and I think we're in agreement on a lot of things. And I look forward to how we move on this and how they choose who's going to be on the steering committee, and it will be an interesting process. I've worked with large committees before. It's always very dynamic when you put 15, 20 people in a room together to try to decide how the city moves into the future. And that concludes. Anybody else have any more? Or want to supplement anything?
I don't know if I went into that in any detail. I mean, so I was previously on the Parks and Community Events Commission, so that is dear to my heart. We are well down on the federal guidelines for parks in our community. And we had a discussion on the Rio Vista project about the fact that what's happening a lot is that in HOAs, the builder will develop an HOA and they count that land inside that gated community as part of parks. But it's not public land in the sense that if I want to go there, I can't because it's gated. And so I think that's another concern for me in terms of recreation. I think making the city more friendly both for pedestrians and bikes is something that we need to look at. We've made some progress on that in the last couple of years, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. CV Link is, I don't know where CV Link is. We have a section of it which is currently not accessible, which is not terribly useful. It will be accessible at least from the new Dream Homes Park when that is finished. But it gets me back to what I said about character. We're not an urban community. We don't want to be. We're suburban at best. And we want that feeling that here is a great generally open and well-resourced community where you can bring up children and families can retire and older people can feel safe and comfortable. So that's the community that we're looking for, and that requires a lot of infrastructure. And I know we have all this extra land that we can't develop right now, which is north of the 10. And so I think that also needs some consideration. Now, that may be outside the scope because of the general plan, but nonetheless, it's an area of consideration. We've been looking to get some kind of industrial use over there, so that we can get the infrastructure built. But right now, we're sort of self-limited to being south of the 10, right up into the cove, but we're just not using that land at all. So it's another concern.
Commissioner Mead, anything else?
I was just gonna piggyback on what you were saying about parks, because there are a lot of, I think, cities doing great things with little pocket parks, and, you know, to your point about public space and open space, we definitely don't want to end up with situations where a rooftop deck is considered, on an apartment building, is considered open space, because it isn't really. So I think allowing for unique uses, and, you know, I love going down Dinah Shore through Rancho Mirage with the winding sidewalk, and a lot of cities are doing great things where they're putting in sidewalks that go around trees, and not everything has to be straight, and, you know, so I love that kind of creativity, and I would love for our city to be that kind of a city, you know, that we do some creative and unique things compared to what's traditionally done, so.
And to dovetail on both commissioners, I can't remember the name of the fee, it escapes me, but every development pays a fee that goes towards parks. And we really should have more parks, facilities, and recreation, you know, built into our process. So, you know, for people at all levels, not just kids, but, you know, things for seniors, things for middle-aged people, things for millennials. So I agree with all of that also. Anything else? Or do you have any questions of us?
You have done a terrific job. You gave me a lot to write about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank the
With
commission
that-
as well. This has been a very valuable discussion, so thank you for enriching us with your thoughts and opinions. And certainly, this is not the last time that we're going to be talking about this. This is the first time. So as we put the RFP together and get that out on the street, I think getting the right consultant on board is key for us and for the community. And this is a very important part of that phase. So thank you very much for your comments this evening. We appreciate that as staff, and we look forward to sharing this with council on August 14th.
Ms. Schultz, you have a very tough task ahead of you. And I wish you luck. And if, you know, I'm sure that any one of us, if there's anything we can do to help you out, that
Absolutely.
we'd be more than open to spending time with you on that.
I appreciate your support and your time. Thank you.
Moving on, commissioners' reports.
It's actually discussion of future agenda items. I apologize.
What?
Number 6.
Number 6, discussion of future agenda items up on your screen?
Number 6 is commissioners' reports.
Yeah,
No,
up on your
it's-
screen, Vice Chair. Apologies. There you go.
Oh, okay. My annotated agenda is incorrect. Discussion of future agenda items. Ms. Molina, is there anything on future agenda items?
We will be having a planning commission meeting on August 7th, and we expect to have the Rosemont storage project. So we'll be sending noticing out soon for that. It's a specific plan amendment of the Uptown Village specific plan and a design for a proposed storage facility. That's one item we anticipate. We also anticipate a CUP for expansion of a existing cannabis business. So we do have a few items on our agenda coming up.
And just for the planning purposes of having a quorum, since we're down one person until the 5th person's appointed, I will have a conflict of interest on the project you just mentioned.
Well, we do have 4 commissioners so far appointed, and so, and we expect to have Commissioner McPhair back, and so if there is a conflict, hopefully we maintain a quorum.
I just wanted to let you know that I won't be able to participate in that discussion. Okay, can we go on to commissioners' reports now?
Definitely.
Okay. Commissioner Mead, I'd like to officially welcome you. This was quite a first meeting, and you did a great job, and I look forward to working with you. You have really great ideas and a great understanding of everything, and congratulations. And the City Council
you
made
so
a good
much.
choice.
Thank you. I didn't have anything to report. I was just going to say thank you all for being so welcoming, and really enjoyed my first meeting and looking forward to future ones.
Commissioner Lee?
I just want to say I love you all. Thank you for your support. No, that's it.
Okay, I have the next item as city attorney comments. Madam City Attorney, do you have any comments for us?
I do not, and hopefully I will be seeing everybody in person at the next meeting, so thank you so much.
And now we're back to staff. Is there any staff comments?
I myself don't have any comments, Vice Chair. Director Firestein might.
I couldn't hear you.
I don't have any comments, but Andy may.
Okay.
Believe it or not, no, I actually do not have any comments, but I do look forward to seeing the commission in person at your next meeting.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to being here. Our next meeting will be August 7th, right?
Correct.
So I look forward to that meeting, and if there's nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting at 7:56.